Good afternoon, everybody. My name is David Furman. I'm one of the attorneys here at Altitude Community Law, and I hope you are having a super awesome and special day. Thank you for joining us today for this How Developers Screw Things Up webinar to go over the many various ways that both developers and communities have managed to be created inappropriately and unfortunately. On your screen, as always, on your screen, you should primarily be seeing the PowerPoint presentation. It's the big thing. It says how developers screw things up. You should additionally be seeing a small box on the left-hand side of the screen with the presenter, me, and actually I'm kind of closer to the middle. On the right side of the menu, you'll see a private chat box icon. Please use this icon to type in your questions throughout the presentation. And given how I have kind of gone overboard last time and the last few things, I will start to wait a little bit to try and address some of the questions that pop up so we can make sure we can get through as much of it as possible, because I don't want to run over and I want to be respectful of everybody's time. If you have any audio or video issues during the presentation, please click the No Audio or Video button below the PowerPoint on your screen and follow the instructions. Usually it just says turn it on and turn it off again, but that's just high-tech land. 1 CMCA credit certificate will be automatically generated and emailed to you within 48 hours of the webinar, assuming you attend the entire program. So at the very least, leave your computer on. The image certificate will be emailed, will only be available for 30 days. So you need to print the email with the certificate. Please don't forget to do that. Go ahead and print it because it's only there for 30 days. As a reminder, this presentation will be recorded and added to Altitude YouTube channel within a couple days, depending on how much we like it and don't like it. But no, it'll be done in a couple days. Lastly, there will be a survey that will pop up at the end of the webinar. We truly appreciate any feedback you can provide. It's what allows us to improve. It's what allows them to allow me to keep teaching. So if you like it, great. If not, let me know and I can always change it. Your thoughts and opinions assist us with improving future presentations. And I have very thick skin. Please don't hold back. All right, with that being said, I also want to remind you all that I am not necessarily your attorney. I'm not necessarily the association's attorney, or at least I am not dealing with these issues on your association level until you reach out and contact us. So please, if you have any of these issues, reach out and contact us. I'm giving general legal advice, and obviously everything is very document specific, situational specific. So please take these general points and let me know how we can help you. So we'll kick it off. How developers tend to screw things up. You can get additional information at our website, www.altitude.law. Sign up on our website for blog and newsletters. Our Facebook page, which shockingly enough is facebook.com/Altitude Community Law, Twitter @Altitude Community Law, or LinkedIn.com company Altitude Community Law. We're in all the places. Okay, so what Kiowa says, and to take a step back, this obviously, when we're talking about what developers do or don't do, this mostly relates to communities that have come out of the ground, have been created since July 1st, 1992. So these are going to be Kiowa-based communities. So we really do kind of look at what Kiowa says, because prior to the adoption of that, there really weren't, other than in the Condominium Act, as far as single family or townhome communities, there weren't a whole lot of rules and regulations surrounding what had to happen. Kiowa was enacted to be a uniform act, or to be a standard set of guidelines and requirements mandated for every developer to develop a community, and how to bring these communities from start to finish out of the ground. So CRS 38-33.3-12.5 states what exactly is required to be in your declaration. And if you wonder why your declaration is either so long or so short, you can always go back to section 205 and say, do we have everything that we're required to have? Section 210 is a very strict adherence of exercise of the development rights, how a community is developed, what the developer is allowed to do, what the developer is not allowed to do, how long the developer is allowed to do these things. And of course, 38-33.3-303 subsection 9, transition. How does the developer get out of the community? How do you as a board stay in the community, or your homeowner elected boards move forward with that, with starting to govern and manage the community? So this is kind of the basis of where we start with. This is the statutory framework. Also, as you all know, 38-33.3-209.5 mandates that every association adopt 9 good governance policies. What I've seen when this originally was adopted in 2005, 2006, a lot of developers, what they tried to do is just to save money and be really cute about it. And when I say be cute about it, they were trying to make sure the association had everything it needed to govern itself. And the developers at that time started to embed the required good governance policies, section 209.5 policies, in the bylaws. So you would have bylaws that kind of expanded and ballooned, and they would include the enforcement policy, they would include the collection policy, that include all of these 9 good governance policies, or at least the 8 good governance policies, and then the 9th was put into the declaration, usually regarding alternative dispute resolution and how you could sue the developer, or how you could proceed with construction defects, or what the hoops you had to jump through to resolve your conflicts with the developer would usually appear in the declaration. So with that, at the outset, I would argue that that violates the Colorado Common Interest Ownership Act, because the Colorado Common Interest Ownership Act at section 209.5 says the association shall adopt these, when it was originally developed, 7, and then ballooned to 9, good governance policies. And they are separate standalone policies that, if you look at section 209.4, are required to be disclosed as separate disclosure items. So you have a situation where if you don't have separate standalone policies, you can't comply with either the section 209.4 disclosure requirements of your 9 good governance policies and your section 317.7 requirement to make available for inspection and copying your good governance policies. So I would argue right at the outset, if the developer has embedded or put these policies into the bylaws or somehow put them into the declaration, you are still, as an association, required to adopt the policies, even if they say, please see Article 9 of the declaration, please see Article 17 of the bylaws. Whatever that may be, you are still required to have these separate standalone policies. So just at the outset, do you have all the documents you're required to have? And I would, like I said, during that period of 2006, 2007, 2008, when this first statute was first enacted, if they are embedded in your bylaws, that's a non-compliant bylaw, and you're still required to adopt those policies. Plus, also, as you know, these policies get updated like annually. And if you're trying to keep up with the annual updates of the policies, it makes it very difficult to keep amending your bylaws or amend your declaration for what is now a policy that is void just due to statutory changes. So there's the practical piece too of why you want to keep them separate. Okay. So that being started, or that being said, Kathy, if you've got a CAIO exempt community, a lot of what I'm about to say still kind of applies, because these are generic manner how they screw them up. But as you know, CAIO exempt communities are not necessarily required to adopt the 9 good governance policies. We recommend, as a matter of course, they do, just because the courts like to see them. And if the courts like to see them in CAIO communities, and now your metro districts are required to adopt good governance policies, I think the courts like to make sure that the owners are getting due process in CAIO exempt communities. And one way of due process of doing that is having these policies in place. So even if you're CAIO exempt, I would still recommend adopting these policies. Okay, so the declaration. From the get-go, you have very specific, very simple provisions They are set forth in the statute. They say you must do this, 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 and this. What could possibly go wrong with this? Well, I can also let you know, just as a general statement, obviously everything I'm about to say, I have either seen or has been litigated. And it has been litigated because the developer screwed things up. So, also, as a general statement, many of these issues may not come to light for years after the developer is gone. And it's one of those things. So what I'm suggesting we do is, as your community starts to transition, you still have the developer around. Make sure that all of this is done correctly. Make sure that you still have a developer that can amend the declaration using their declarant control or reserve declarant rights to fix what they may have screwed up. So it's kind of one of those, let's get them while they're still there, and we may be able to avoid some of these things. But to start with, did they record a declaration with all the exhibits? And most notably, I think many of you have probably seen it when you get hold of the declaration. Do you have it all? Do you have a declaration that actually has a legal description in it which binds the property? That's one of the things that developers will just forget. They'll just forget to put on the legal description as an exhibit, because when they get the document from their attorney will say, all right, here is the declaration. It's all set up. You need to attach the exhibits. And because they usually are doing this right from the time they're about to sell a home, they just record the declaration and then sell the home. Well, you've just forgotten the exhibit. You've forgotten what property is bound by this community. So you're having to play catch up on that as to, what do you do? What do you happen? Do you even have an ability? Do you even have a community without that? Another provision states, Kiowa states that all of the limited common elements must be allocated in the declaration or depicted on the map. This creates an enormous problem when you have a declarant that starts allocating parking or storage units in a deed. Or they say, I'm conveying to you Unit 1 and parking space 101, and that's in the deed. It's not in the declaration. And the map just says limited common element space 1. But it doesn't allocate, or space 101, but it doesn't allocate to which unit it's supposed to be allocated to. I'm working with a community right now that the declarant sold the parking spaces. They're all limited common element parking spaces, sold them in the deeds. And then when they put them all in the deed, they didn't put them in the map, they didn't put them in the declaration. So owners think they have a use right for these, when really they don't have a use right for them because they weren't properly allocated. And oh yeah, by the way, they double sold 2 or 3 spaces. So we now have to go back and find out exactly who has the use rights for what. There's a reason the Colorado Common Interest Ownership Act says, put it in the map. That's a document of record that everybody can look at. Plus, they're all pre-allocated. So you don't have a declarant saying, yeah, I can get you a closer parking space. Or you know, the people in the sales office say, oh, yeah, you want parking space 1? We can get you parking space 1. Not a problem. And parking space 1 has already been sold by the guy next to him who sold the unit 2. So it becomes very problematic. That's why there needs to be a master list. It needs to be in the declaration. Annexation of land. As you know, communities can be phased. The Colorado Common Interest Ownership Act says you can phase a community, meaning that when you record your declaration, you don't necessarily bind the entire the community. You don't subject it to the declaration all at once. Because again, the developer likes to hold it back. So 1, they don't have to pay assessments on it. 2, they can be a lot more flexible that if they need to change product type or create a new community or the market downturns, they're not going to develop it all at once. So you have a situation where they like to phase their communities. You guys all see, you know, filing 1, filing 2, filing 3. That's done because the developer strategically doesn't want to bring it all in at once. Or like in the Pulte Homes case, where the developer didn't even own it. Pulte Homes came in and they bought lots from the owner, and they had a takedown schedule. So they bought lots 1 through 10, and then they subjected lots 1 through 10 to the community. Well, lots 90 or 11 through 90 or 11 through 100, they were not made subject to the declaration because, one, Pulte Homes didn't own them at the time, and two, they were buying them from the property owner as they did it, so they didn't have to have the cash outlay when they were doing it. Well, what happens then is when they sell a home, they need to annex that home or that unit or that lot into the community as they're going along. And back in the early 2000s, some developer attorneys created this concept of annexation by deed. And in a way, it was a great way to do it, because every time they sold a house, it was deemed to automatically annex it into the declaration. And the declaration stated that any deed or any conveyance of a lot by deed automatically annexed that lot into the community unless it was a deed from the declarant to a authorized builder or subsequent declarant. So it had a fail-safe that it every time they have a new community or a new lot selling, it was just brought in by deed. However, in the Ryan Ranch decision, and this decision came out 5-6 years ago at this point, the Colorado Supreme Court said no, annexation by deed is not a thing. Annexation by deed, you cannot do. It has to be by supplemental declaration, because the plain language in the Colorado Communist Ownership Act says you have to have a supplemental declaration. So what started to happen is developers just forgot. They forgot that they have, as you know, they build the house, they want to sell it, they get it to the title company, and they close it, and they forget to annex it. So you now have a situation where you have a community where some of the lots are annexed, some are not, and where we discover this a lot is when we try and go amend and restate the declaration. We ask for all the supplemental declarations or all the proof that all these properties have been annexed, and we can't find them all. So we are now then having to go back and try and find and do a lot of research on what is and what is not in the community. And Leanne, it says, we have found in developing communities that subdivisions occur without telling the management company. True. The only way to find out the cross-reference the county assessor site, and we get a lot of pushback from the owner about backdating the HOA dues. Is there a better way to avoid this? And the answer is, you need to get notice when the developer sells it. And quite frankly, that's another thing that we're going to discuss coming up in a few minutes, is to how we handle those lots or when it comes in. And the bottom line, Leanne, is when a unit sells, if it is not recorded or not done pursuant to supplemental declaration, we may not have the ability to go out and get assessments, back to assessments, or quite frankly, potentially assessments at all, because that property was not properly annexed into the community. And this is something that we need to sit on the developers to make sure they cannot sell a home until they properly annex it into the community. The declaration. I see this more often than not, that again, a developer who develops a community and they want to save money, they want to make sure that they are not paying to recreate a declaration, and they don't like paying their law firms. They'll just take a declaration from a community they did before, change a name on it, hopefully throw a new exhibit on it, and just reuse it. And essentially, it has absolutely nothing to do with this particular community. We represent an association where that's what the developer did. They just picked something offline, picked something up online, from the clerk and recorder's office, changed the name on it, recorded it, called it their community, and they tried to sell a single-family community when in fact what they were selling were condominiums. And the developer just botched it, and that ended up in like 3 years worth of litigation and $500,000 worth of attorney's fees, trying to figure that out. And we got the developer there that they were still in the community, but you can kind of see how the developer screwed it up, if you will, of they did not custom create the document. And as we always say to you guys, that you as managers, know these policies that we produce or these declarations we produce, they are custom drafted for your community based on your documents or based on the situation of what your developer did. So it's not just a cut and paste job. These are custom created documents. And when the developer doesn't custom create their document or just reuses documents, it causes mass chaos. So we want to make sure, again, going through some of the litigation on this that has happened. In the Abriels Meadow case, the court held that the declaration must be signed. Kiowa says the declaration must be signed in the same manner as a deed. Well, what does that mean? Well, what it means is it has to be notarized and it has to be signed. And if you don't have a signed declaration, you don't have a community. The Silverview would overlook. The developer forgot the time frame upon which it could exercise its declarant rights. Therefore, the developer screwed up and had no ability to truly develop the community because there was no declaration and there was no annexation right and there was no ability to do anything. The Pulte countryside, was the property annexed? Was it annexed properly? De-annexation. This is something that comes up when a developer, again, mistakenly, potentially, annexes in the entire community into the community and then starts selling units. They sell the land, or the developer goes bankrupt and somebody comes in and buys the property out of the bankruptcy and then wants to, again, doesn't want to pay assessments, so they try and de-annex the property. Did they properly de-annex the property? The Colorado Supreme Court has said, if you have property in a filing that has sold, you cannot de-annex that filing. And this came from the situation where the developer wanted to just de-annex specific lots that had not been sold, and the court said, no, you have to take kind of the entire filing, and if there has been any property sold to an end user in the filing, you cannot just withdraw that property. And they were trying to do it to save money on assessments. And that is the problem they ran into. So again, it's not only with the annexation, but that they illegally tried to de-annex property and screw it up that way. Did they form the association? It has been litigated as to Kiowa mandates that prior to the sale of a unit in the community, they are required to form the association. Did they? There are associations that have been, again, an appellate court case where the declarant just forgot to form the association and sold units and went off. And what happens in that situation? And I'll tell you, in that situation, any owner can go form the community and start it up and create the community that way. So those are some of the ways the declarant screwed it up. And Alex, you state, what is the legal status of condos that are sold before the declaration is recorded? And that's a really good question, Alex, because technically speaking, without the declaration, there is no condominium. The declaration is what creates the condominium. So I would argue the legal status of a condominium that was sold before the declaration is it doesn't exist. But obviously you can't have that. So I think what would happen is the court would reform the deeds to state that the condominium declaration was recorded and whatever was sold pursuant to that non-existent condominium declaration, but you would have to reform their deeds. Michael, let me see briefly. How does the new board find out if the deck was a copy-paste job? Well, I think it's look at it and say, does it make sense for your community? Is this really what you guys bought? Is this really? And remember, a developer will create a community to sell homes. So that's kind of a a very generic answer to, does it work? Do you have a declaration that describes single-family homes when you really have attached product? Does your declaration have party wall language in it? Or on the flip side of that, does your declaration have party wall language in it and they're detached products? Or does the declaration talk about party walls and lots when you have condominiums? You have a condominium map. You need to make sure all of your governing documents are consistent. Your declaration, does it describe condominiums and you have a condominium map? Does your declaration describe lots and townhomes and you have a plat map, not a condominium map? Because a condominium map contains horizontal boundaries. And that usually implies that you have a product that is attached and you have common elements and you have airspace units. And the case that I mentioned where the developer was trying to go out and claim he was selling townhomes, but what they were really selling were condominiums. And that's what the county had, and that's what the city had, and that's what was approved. And you had one tap for 3 units, and it created a mess. And like I said, it's one of those things that we had to look at. How do we reform this? And the appellate court just said, yeah, you can reform the maps and kind of create what you actually have on the ground, because they don't want to commit waste where you have a product that was sold, you have title issues, so they try and reform these to get rid of those title issues. Okay. 2, I start with, are all the lots buildable? We represented an association a number of years ago where they platted 2 lots in the community. These were supposed to be dues-paying lots, and they were not buildable. They were in a wetland, and they couldn't be built. So what the developer tried to do is they conveyed them to the association saying, here, you now own 2 lots, go have fun. And we got into a disagreement as to whether or not the declarant could just do that. And the bottom line is no, the declarant can't just convey property to somebody. They were dues paying lots. Now what the association could do is we worked with the developer to amend the map and to turn those into common elements as opposed to depicted lots. Because again, this comes really important, because when you buy into a community and it says there are 100 lots in the community, everybody in the community says, okay, I own 1/100th of the community. I'm on the hook for 1/100th of the assessments being paid. And then if you are all of a sudden not on the hook for 1/100th of the common expenses, but 1/98th, your expenses just went up a little bit. So it becomes problematic. So we had to turn around and turn those into common elements, and you couldn't just give somebody the lots that were never going to be paid. Get into, should all the lots be built? I think you probably all saw, 6-7 months ago, the story running around that the developer, the town, let the developer build 5 lots that were on a landfill, and they were architecturally and structurally compromised. Homes were ultimately condemned, and the city ended up buying them back because they should never have been built. And it's one of those things where, again, the developer, trying to maximize the profits, went ahead and platted property that should never have been built. And what do you do with those lots that are not buildable? It's again, do they become common elements? In this particular case, the first one that they were platted into the wetlands and couldn't be built, at least no house was built on them, and we were able to turn them into common elements. In the second one, again, that community would have had to go through and amend their declaration to make sure that those lots were in fact turned into common elements. And we'll talk about common elements in just a second, but this gets into also the plat. The common elements. What is the common elements, and who owns the common elements, and does that make sense? So again, I make the notes of, as your developer cramming homes into places that the homes don't want to go, and just to try and get them, to turn more profit. Payment of assessments. Kiowa mandates that the assessment formula contained in the declaration not discriminate in favor of the declarant. So this was a compromise in that you can't have a declarant prior to Kiowa, prior to the Colorado Common Expenditure Act. You'd see assessment formulas that say the declarant doesn't owe assessments, even though the declarant would have units that were built, and the declarant may have actually been using the units as show units, and they were insured by the association, and they were heated by the association. They were operating on the association's dime. The declarant exempted themselves out from paying assessments. When Kiowa was enacted in 1982, it came up with this. All right, your assessment formula cannot discriminate in favor of the declarant. All right, we like that. It makes it, if the declarant has a unit in the community, they don't have to. They have to pay assessments the same as everybody else. then they also, was the compromise was, they said, which is causing some of our other problems, is, but you can phase the community and you don't have to annex in all of the property at once. So even though you have a unit that may be built or the declarant's working on these homes, you don't have to pay assessments on it until the unit's actually brought into the community, which, we got done, we spent the last, 20 minutes saying all the problems that are associated with that. I don't know if one way is better than the other. But we need to make sure that the declarant is paying assessments pursuant to the formula based in the declaration. And there's another kind of, I'm sure you've all seen it, or if you've seen documents that were created by certain developer attorneys that, kind of these ideas get mirrored and they get picked up. But it was the concept of an initially unoccupied unit or an initially unoccupied lot that they said should only have to pay 25% of the assessments or some portion of the assessments, because 315 of Kiowa states that common expense assessments that go to maintain limited common elements or benefit fewer than all the units can be charged exclusively to those units. So the concept is if I have a unit that's not occupied, I shouldn't necessarily have to pay management fees on it, or I shouldn't have to necessarily pay certain insurance costs or certain other costs. So we're going to say that we only benefit 25% of the assessment by 25% of the assessments because you're paying insurance because we're in the building, and you're paying snow removal to make sure we can get to our lot. So that was the concept, and that seems to be permitted by Kiowa. But what happens is they just don't pay assessments on lots that have been annexed into the community. And I think, Leanne, to Leanne, your question of, we don't get to know until after the fact. Well, this is one way that you find out is in the transition audit that we're going to discuss in just a few seconds. This is, again, another way that the developer screws everything up by trying to be cheap on assessments or trying to not pay assessments that they're legally obligated to pay. I call this the promise to the owner. And this is something that, I think everybody also sees is when you have salespeople sitting in an office and they're trying to sell homes in a community, or they're trying to sell condominiums, they'll promise the sun to this particular owner just to sell the unit, because they need to make sure they're hitting their numbers. They need to make sure these units get sold. They need to make sure that everything is getting done as soon as possible so that the developer can move on and get out and pay their bills. So they allow the common elements adjacent to the home to be occupied. Yeah, you can throw a garden in there, not a problem. Yeah, you can build this in there, not a problem. We'll go ahead and do it. Contracting to allow an owner to control certain areas, such as, you need that you need that storage unit? Yeah, we'll give you that storage unit, not a problem. Or did you need this particular modification? Yeah, we can do that. And then you get certain communities that, the condominium map says one thing, but the unit built by the declarant looks entirely different. And they make promises. The other one is, yeah, you can park your 10 cars in the community. It's not a problem. Even though the declaration says you must put all your cars in your garage, they make yeah, you can do it. I did represent a declarant client at one point that, every time they had an owner come up and say, or a potential buyer come up and say, well, I want this, I want that. The developer called me and says, well, can we amend the declaration to allow this? And they kept amending the declaration to allow unit-specific alterations. And it becomes very problematic because they forget what, where, or how. But there was so much pressure to get these units built and to get these units sold that they were just absolutely violating the declaration by selling things and making promises they just couldn't keep. And then, of course, you, the managers, are left picking up the slack or picking up the problems when the developer comes back and says, or an owner comes back and says, no, I was promised this. This was mine. The developer, when I bought the unit, said I could have this backyard area and I could build my fence and install my carport. Really? That's not what the declaration says, and the developer can't sell that property. So it really becomes problematic when you're trying to deal with these things after the fact, after the developer's gone. Yes. The transition to the board of directors. How many, again, how many of these do you get where the developer doesn't want to give up control because sales may have slowed and they want to make sure that they're staying in control of everything, or quite frankly, they just forgot and they don't want to lose control. But remember, the declarant is required to turn over the board of directors at the earliest to occur of these three triggers. At sale of 25% of the units that may be created, at least one owner or one board member must be selected by the owners. And they must control at least 25% of the votes of the board of directors. Upon sale of the 50% of the units that may be created, and the units that may be created is a number in the declaration. It must be there. If it's not there, they don't have the right to create units and they don't have a right to control the board. So upon sale of 50% of the units that may be created, at least 33% of the board must be persons elected by the board, by the owners, other than the declarant. So this is, you don't necessarily have to have an election at the 50% part, because if you have a 3-person board, that second bullet point is already complied with, because you have 33% of the board already elected by the owners other than the declarant. Now, at the 75% mark, a majority of the board must be elected by owners other than the declarant. So that is full transition. And that is something that the owners need to take control of the board. And this triggers other obligations. And we'll get into those other obligations because they have to release the declarant control. Now, as I mentioned, and I've been teasing, there are 2 other triggers. 1, sale of 75% of the units may be created. We just talked about that. Or this is the earliest to occur of 2 years from the sale of a unit in the ordinary course of business. Or 2 years from the date the right to create a unit was last exercised. So if your developer is plugging away and they're selling units, but units start to turn down and the sales start to slow down, and they have not sold and or annexed property into the community in over 2 years, you must transition, and the declarant can no longer control that board. And Beth, your question of what constitutes a sale for turnover? A sale is a sale to an end user other than to a declarant or a declarant affiliate. So it's basically, if that unit is controlled of the declarant or a subsequent declarant, that is not a sale. But a sale to an end user, an end occupant, an investor, those are sales. And those can either keep the declarant control period alive or terminate it if it's at that 75% of the units that may be created. And in relation to the first one, it's within 60 days of the sale of 75% of the units that may be created. The other 2, it's not. That is immediate. So the second you hit 730 days of no sales or no annexations, you must transition. And your declarant must give up control. So what does that really mean? Well, it means you have a homeowner control board of directors. It means the declarant must turn over to the association the original or certified copies of the declaration, the articles of incorporation, the bylaws, the minute books, financial records, and all rules, regulations, and policies. The declarant is required to give that to the association. Now, I know that a lot of declarants that, they hire the first management company and they're relying on the management company to have all of these things, but this is not a management company obligation. It is a declarant obligation to make sure the manager or management company association has all of these documents. An accounting of the association funds and financial statements from the date the first assessment is received. This is the transition audit. It must be given to the association within 60 days of turnover. They are required to contract for it. They cannot charge it to the association. This is a declarant obligation. So a lot of associations say, well, we want to pick the auditor that does this. That is not the association's obligation to do that, or not. It's not the association's right to do it. It is the declarant's obligation to provide this audit to the association. If the community was long and drawn out, if the community went through struggles, if the community didn't necessarily maintain all its records as it should have, during the developer period, these obligations don't go away. The declarant may say, this audit is too expensive. This audit can't be done. Well, then they need to pay to have an auditor say it can't be done. All right, Michael. Let me see. Just to be clear, for example, developer still owns 2 homes due to a slow market out of a total of 100. At time of transition, is the developer still responsible for the pro rata portion of dues allocated to those 2 homes? They absolutely are. They should have been paying that all along. When you transition, the assessments are based on the lot count. So if they've been brought into the community, they are required to pay assessments on those lots. Christina, what about communities where the new declarant with special declarant rights? What about communities where there is a new declarant with special declarant rights? Well, I would argue you're implying that the new declarant is coming in with declarant rights. Okay, well then that is the new declarant's obligation to make sure the transition audit is completed because they have declarant rights. But getting back to that, do they have declarant rights? They must have the declarant rights must be given to this new declarant by written instrument, recorded in the real property records, and they cannot expand upon the existing rights. So you have a situation where, forget declarant control. Okay, declarant control is just over the board, but the declarant rights, I mentioned at the beginning, you must have a date upon which the declarant rights are exercised or they become void. Historically, it's been 7 to 10 years to build a community out. So the community will say, or the declaration will say, the declarant shall have these reserved special declarant rights for 10 years from the date of recording of the declaration. What happens if they go 11 years? Well, the declarant rights have expired. They have no declarant rights. Whoever was the declarant at the expiration of those rights must perform that transition audit, even if they've somehow managed to maintain control of the board for that period of time. Their declarant rights have expired and they need to transition the community. Okay. The association's money. They have to give control of the association's money, the bank accounts, to the association, meaning they have to remove themselves as signers from all association accounts, and they must make sure the association elected board has access to those. All tangible property that has been represented by the declarant to be property of the association, including anything needed to run the community. This really comes up with communities that have like a clubhouse and they have workout equipment in the clubhouse. You know, everybody comes running in, they're looking at the clubhouse, they tour the clubhouse, they see the sales offices in it, and they see this beautiful area, the pump house, the pool, the exercise equipment. That is all required to be given to the association by bill of sale. I would demand you get a bill of sale for all of the equipment given to the association because it's required. A copy of the plans and specifications for the non-exclusive use of the association used in the construction of the improvements of the community. You're required to get the blueprints. You're required to be given the blueprints of condominiums or the plans, the architectural designs, all of the plans where the sprinkler lines went, the official development plan that says where the landscaping is and how much landscaping and what was approved. All of that is required to be given to the association. All of your insurance policies in place, certificates of occupancy that have been issued, permits issued by the government to build the community within 1 year of transition. So any part of the community that was built within a year of transition, you're required to get the permits from the governmental entity that allowed the construction. Written warranties from contractors that built the community and current contracts of the community that are still in effect, and the written warranties that are still in effect. You're required to get the owners list to know who's in your community. We talked about, so let me stop there for just a second. That is everything the declarant is required to give to you, the association. And that is something that you're absolutely required to get because, quite frankly, that's how you're going to know what the community is. And I would argue at this time, you need to go out and make sure you get all of the supplements. That is part of the declaration. And the maps. Get all the condominium maps. Make sure you're receiving all the plat maps. They are required. Kiowa says the declaration and the maps are one and the same document. So you're required to get all of that information. You can't just get some of it. You need to get all of it. And you need to make sure that the transition audit is done. They can't just come to you and say, oops, it's worthless. We can't do it. We have no idea about the funds. Well, then go have a CPA say that. And have the CPA say it so you know exactly what you may or may not be able to collect from the declarant. Because they are required to have all of those funds accounted for that were in the association coffers to make sure they were not used for the development of the community. This is something where the developer just tends to screw it up like nobody's business. Okay. We talked about assignment of multiple spaces at the same time. We've seen this over and over again. You can't just rely on the developer. You've got to go make sure that the developer hands you, we know where all our parking went. We know it's here. We need to, and again, before they get out of the community, make sure that you have an accounting of all of this, where all the parking, where all the storage units went. Got a community down near the University of Denver that certain spaces were assigned twice, certain storage units were moved and reassigned, and we didn't know who the hell had them. We need to make sure that we get all of this information. Number 9, changes mid-development. As market conditions change, developers often pivot to new strategies in large communities. And it runs into situations where you'll have a community that they may make, again, certain promises on one area that, you know, this is a maintenance-free community and the assessments are calculated on we maintain everything. And then as the market conditions cool and they start to say, all right, well, we're not going to maintain everything on this next set of lots. Well, did they properly document it? Did they make sure they recorded an amendment to the declaration that says lots 40 through 60 are zero maintenance and you have to maintain it yourself? And then, well, okay, if you do that, do we have 2 classes of assessments that we have to do? Because if you have a formula that says all lots pay equal assessments and then lots 1 through 39 get 3 times the maintenance, how is that going to work? How are you going to make sure that that doesn't it doesn't create problems in your assessment capabilities moving forward? And is it the developer just came to you and said, okay, this is how we build our budget. You, manager, just build a budget based on this with absolutely zero supporting information in your declaration to prove that or to justify that. So, Mike, let me see. It's up. Is there a gap period as part of the transition where the first new board could be exposed due to the no D&O insurance in place, or is coverage maintained for a period of time by the developer? The developer better have D&O insurance at all times, because remember, there's a different standard of care for a developer that serves on a board than the owners that serve on a board. The developer serves on the board as a fiduciary to the entire community. They do not get to avail themselves to the zero liability that a homeowner elected board member has, which is the standard of care for a homeowner elected board member is willful and wanton behavior. For the developer, it's not. They are straight fiduciaries to the community. So if you have a community where the developer does not have D&O insurance, you need to insist upon that. All right. What if the declarant is not putting some of the common elements in the, that's the next slide. The board has no control over the community, it's not maintaining these areas, but the declarant won't change name of ownership. All right. That is actually, thank you so much, Christina. Failure to convey complete the common elements. You knew it was coming. The developer has an obligation to complete the common elements as they're described on the plat. And the plat is going to have a provision that says who owns what tract and who has a maintenance obligation for what tract. And if the developer is not turning over part of the community, you can force the issue. You can force the issue by stating, developer, you have to give it to us. And if you don't, we can send the standard nastygram. Or quite frankly, it's a tort if they don't turn it over. Now, they have time to turn it over because as a general statement, the plat says this property is supposed to be part of the community, but they can keep it out of the community as long as they want to up until kind of that transition or declarant control period, because part of the reserved declarant rights is to add property to community or sell, convert units to common elements to units, but all of that would have to go through some approval processes. So it's not uncommon for a developer to hold on to the property until the end, but at the end of the day, they are required to convey it to the association. And if we need to go get it, we can go get it. And the developer would be required to pay all of our attorney's fees in going to get it. But, my biggest concern, quite frankly, is usually when the developer just leaves. They built out the community, they go, they disappear, they dissolve the entity that actually built the community, and you have property that's sitting in somebody else's name. You need to go take action to go get that property. And usually it's a quiet title action or it's some sort of demand letter to the developer, give it to us now. Usually they do, but it's something, again, at the end of the day, the developer represented this property was going to be part of the community, so they must give it to the association. They can't hold it. Patrick, developer changes strategies, now divides lots from 1 to 2 or builds paired homes, city approved, but now where more lots or less lots are combined in the original deck. What happens? This gets back to, Patrick, where the statement of the developer can only put in the number of lots that they represented at the very beginning of the, community. This community is 100 lots. They cannot put 101 lots in it. They can only put 100 lots unless they amend the declaration. And in order to amend that provision of the declaration, because it increases the developer lots, that's a vote of the owners other than the declarant. The declarant cannot unilaterally amend that. And I know developers do that on a regular basis. They just blow by that number to try and get more lots in the community because they do. They change, they pivot, they do whatever. They have to come have a conversation with the association because technically that violates CAID. Now, you could also ask yourself, is it that big a deal? Are we really going to get into a fight now that we have 101 homes? But I would argue, Patrick, again, the other problem is, do you now have a maintenance obligation for a duplex unit where you didn't on a single family? Did that material change what your maintenance obligations are now? Another problem, were the roads completed? Was the infrastructure completed? Represent a community that the developer was required to put in a drainage pond and didn't do it, and the drainage wasn't going anywhere. Did the town release the letter of credit or the security for the completion of these improvements? You may have to go back to the town and say, look, town, make them finish this improvement. Make them finish the road to county standards or to city standards. All developers are required to put up a letter of credit or some sort of security to make sure this is all completed. We need to make sure the town does not release any of these security instruments before this community is completed. And that may take some work on the manager to go make sure the town knows this community is not in fact completed. The stalled community. Restarting a stalled community a number of years later leads to confusion for the existing community in relation to reserve components. Do they have annexation rights? Do they have reserved declarant rights still? If not, when did they expire? What can they do? The owners in the community have a large influence on restarting a community with stalled development rights or expired reserved rights, because the Colorado Community Stone Pact says the declarant can reinstate these rights upon amendments of the declaration upon whatever conditions the community requires. So we can require cash payments. We can require completion of improvements. We can require certain other things in order to bring these homes into the community, or in order to allow the developer to complete the community. To some extent, though, a developer does have a legitimate interest in some cases and a legal ability to restart the community, but in some cases not so much. It's document specific, and we can hold them to the fire, hold their feet to the fire to make sure that certain things are being completed as they're required. Okay, my closing thoughts, and I'll get to your question. Check the declaration upon transition. Make sure you have all of these things that are required. Make sure that everything is there. Make sure that all of the annexation documents are there. That is part of the declaration. As I've stated, many of these problems will not show up for years, after the developer is long out of the picture, leaving the association to pick up the pieces. So as much as we can, we need to make sure they do it. So here we go. Is the developer required to pay attorney's fees if we are also demanding another turnover? Yes. They are required. Kiowa states, if you are suing the developer to make sure that we have all the transition items, yes, the developer's on the hook for transition attorney's fees. Is the declarant is the declarant required to maintain the areas still in their name? Yes, they are. And they cannot use association funds to do so until they become association property. Now, that's not necessarily there. The association can be required to insure this area, but the declarant's required to maintain it until they actually bring it into the community at their expense. Cindy, I know not all developers are bad. And I guess, yes, absolutely, yay, you clearly have a hold on your developers and making sure they're complying with the statute. But I just, these are the problems we've seen, and every one of them has been litigated. So not all developers are bad. True. Not all developers are great. Can the status, Chuck, hey, Chuck, how you doing? Can the status letter collect delinquent assessments due from the declarant on his lots from the property ultimately sells to a home buyer? Yes. You can absolutely collect every penny due when that unit sells, and make sure you do. Christina, you had previously referenced districts now being required to adopt good governance policies. Do you know when approximately that was added to the Special District Act? Yes, it was added last year. It was part of the requirement. They don't actually have to have all 9 good governance policies, but they're required to have collection policies. They're required to have enforcement policies, and a few others. It was added to the Special District Act last year after it was all part of the Green Valley Ranch mess. So that's where that came from. And yes, you are. Michael, let me see. In general, is there a statute of limitations to sue the developer after transition? Not really, no. There is for construction defects, but not really for all this other fun stuff. But you got to make sure you're hitting them. You got to make sure you're getting them when the developer's around, because it just becomes infinitely harder when developers move on to other projects. They lose records. They don't care. They're gone. So, a couple more questions. When an association decides to become inactive, but they don't record a declaration of termination or haven't released the property or dissolved themselves and such, so articles of dissolution, what can homeowners do to clarify and confirm this? They have to go through the process. That association exists until that articles of termination have all been recorded and filed. Please don't. I love teaching you guys. I love hanging out. Thank you so much, Barrett. You guys are my favorite. And with that, we have 30 seconds left. Any other questions? If not, I will let you go. Oh, Leanne, hang on. I saw it. Leanne, what if the developer refuses or wants to do their own audit? Well, the developer, it has to be an independent auditor. It cannot be an internal audit, and they can't. And Leanne, I would argue this is absolutely the easiest no-brainer in the world to go ahead and sue on, because you get attorney's fees. And it's they either did or did not do the audit within 60 days of transition. You rule on motions, and the court is going to say, developer, turn over the damn transition audit. It's actually an easy no-brainer situation. Thank you so much, everybody. You're awesome. Have a good day.